Jason Feifer's presentation on Thursday, April 26, 2018 at Dig South Tech Conference in Charleston is brought to you by our partners at Vertical Holdings. Learn more at verticalholdings.net. You're listening to Southpod, Rise of a Region, hosted by Stanfield Gray and John Yarian.
Welcome to Southpod, Rise of a Region.
Thank you. Good to be here.
I'm sure you've interviewed hundreds of founders over the years, presumably many from the South. In your mind, have you noticed any particular characteristics or traits from people, let's say, from the Southeast versus Silicon Valley, New York, and other larger markets?
That's a really interesting question. Hadn't thought of it. Nothing springs to mind in terms of the actual kind of person or whatever, but I would say that the major difference to me is that people in New York, Silicon Valley, et cetera, have access to this very built-in network of investors and this kind of expected hub of tech and entrepreneurship and stuff. And so when I talk to people outside of those areas, I find them to be more inventive about their funding and also community building, that often they are building their own communities or they're plugging into more local resources than folks who are, in these major hubs who almost have that kind of structure built in and they're like trying to tap into it.
To use a specific example, I'm sure you're well versed in the Amazon HQ2 hunt for the next city. 9 of the metros out of the 20 are based in the South. And in particular, I know a lot of our clients and friends in Atlanta feel like they're the odds-on favorite. What do you think that says about the region? Is it a new opportunity? Is it just a natural outgrowth for a company like Amazon to have a second headquarters in North America?
Well, I think that okay, so I had this interesting conversation with a guy who runs something called G Startups. It's a global startup competition, and the point that he made to me that he makes over and over again, actually, he makes that point in our current issue, I think it is, that investors 5-10 years ago used to think of very specific urban areas like New York and Silicon Valley as the places to find talent, and that they have discovered over the last 5 to 10 years that is not true, that there's amazing talent everywhere. And in fact, you can often get that talent for less than if you're hiring them in New York and Silicon Valley. And also you can get the real estate for less. And it's just easier to start a business in these areas outside of these expected hubs. And I think that Amazon's move and the kinds of places that it's looking at, or at least some of the places that it's looking at, speaks to that, because it says that they understand that there's an amazing pool of talent outside of these very particular areas, and that setting up a second headquarters for them is in a place like Atlanta or Charleston is going to be so much more economical than trying to jam it into New York City somewhere, and that it's a really strong business move to tap into this amazing resource of people in these areas that have built up really thriving startup communities, and go in there and harness that energy.
Do you think Atlanta will win? Do you want to jump out with a bold prediction?
I've learned not to make any kinds of predictions. I think that Atlanta makes a lot of sense for all sorts of reasons. I'm probably not going to repeat anything here that hasn't been said before. I mean, it's an amazing transit hub. It already has. Yeah. What's up? Oh, sorry.
So we'll take that as endorsement.
Yeah. I mean, right. It's got the transit hub. It already does have a history of being homes to some giant corporations like Turner and Coca-Cola. So it's got that proven model, and yet it's I don't know if this is a word that sounds insulting down there. I live in New York, so it does with the sprawling. It's sprawling. There's a lot of space, right? There's just a lot of space, and so for a place like for like Amazon, who's going to want to swallow up quite a lot of that space, it's available.
No, we're not offended. I mean, that we're in Atlanta. We know, we drive around it.
Yeah.
think it's an interesting question. I wonder, speaking more broadly and thinking of your role editorially, how does geography influence the way you think about coverage or your responsibility to cover things? In other words, is the South a region that you feel like you need to look at or survey to balance out other stuff, or is that not a consideration at all and you just follow the deals and the innovation?
So it is and it isn't. I run an unusual kind of magazine in that what I'm focused on primarily is people. So I'm not looking to do the blow-by-blow of launches and fundraising deals. I leave that to TechCrunch. And I'm also not looking to chronicle the ways that giant tech companies are changing various industries. I leave that to Fast Company. What I'm doing is telling the stories of entrepreneurs and how they solve problems. And the thing that I always want to be mindful of when I am doing that, because let me just kind of explain what that is. The way that I see our value to our reader is that I want readers to be able to calibrate their way of thinking by reading how smart people solve problems. I love to tell the stories of how people thought through challenges, thought through unexpected problems. And by seeing how they do it, I think that you, the reader, other entrepreneurs can be inspired by that and also just become better thinkers themselves. So that kind of ingenuity comes from everywhere. And I want to be mindful that it doesn't just come from tech companies in Silicon Valley. And in fact, oftentimes, if you're just talking to tech companies in Silicon Valley, you fall into this trap of people who actually haven't solved problems because they don't have revenue generating businesses. They have businesses that have raised a lot of money, which, good for them, but that doesn't mean that they have actually built a sustainable business. So when I think of geography, honestly, what I'm just thinking of is this word that we use in magazines a lot, which is called the mix. The mix. We want to make sure that we're telling a diverse range of stories from a diverse range of entrepreneurs and types of businesses and levels of success. So I do not want somebody who is running a brick and mortar business in Atlanta to feel like this is a magazine for people in Silicon Valley. So I'm really conscious about just making sure that the stories that we're sourcing are from everywhere, but I don't look at particular regions for one reason or another.
Yeah. It's interesting for us. There's obviously a little bit of a challenge in the South in getting your story told because we're a little bit separated from the major media centers. And even with your best efforts to be agnostic and holistic, we've got to get to you. We've got to get
totally
out of this region and into your hands. Thus the pod we're on right now. I wonder what you would say, what an entrepreneur listening to this might learn to that end. Like how do you get attention in more of a media vacuum where we are now? How should they be thinking about this?
So I think that the number one thing that you need to do if you're looking for so let's take a step back because there's a lot of media outlets out there, and not all of them are going to be valuable to an entrepreneur or a company. And the very first thing that I always advise entrepreneurs when they're thinking about press is to think about what press can get them. What do they need press for? Because press is a tool like any other tool. And it does not make sense to chase that if it doesn't have a very specific value to you. I actually, for example, recently heard from a guy in the, I can't remember where he was, but he was somewhere in the South, and he's got like a hot dog food truck, and it's like a really cool hot dog food truck, and it's doing some innovative stuff and whatever. But he reached out to me, and I'd met him at a conference, and then he reached out, and so I felt a little more free to give him advice instead of just like say yes or no to the story. And I told him, like, man, you don't need a story in Entrepreneur right now. Like, I get that would be cool, but that's not what you need. Like, you're launching whatever he was launching. He was launching like a couple other food trucks. I was like, you need local press. That's all you need right now, because the point of press for you is to reach a consumer who's going to come out to your truck. And there might be some point at which you're going to try to franchise this thing or grow nationally in some kind of profile, at which point maybe you do want a story in Entrepreneur, because at that point it might seem like a legitimizer for you to go to investors and say, look, I've been covered in Entrepreneur and blah, blah, blah. But right now you don't need that. And I think that entrepreneurs often get caught up in what they think they need, and they don't think about what actual value it will provide them. So getting press doesn't. You have to think about where you're targeting. Anyway, that was a long way of saying that sometimes I think that people down in the South may think like, oh, I don't know how to reach these magazines in New York. You may not need those magazines. They may not be useful to you.
I think that's exactly right. And one of those motivations we encounter is sometimes folks are just looking for validation. Right?
Yes.
They just want, the thing that says they did the thing. And that's not always a great motivation.
It's a terrible reason to get press. It's a terrible reason to get press because you don't listen. It's like getting press just because you want validation is like going and getting a meeting with an investor before you're ready to pitch them. It means that by the time that you actually need them, they're not going to pay attention to you anymore. Like you get it when you need it. Otherwise, like your own ego is not a reason to go out and get press because that doesn't get you anything. It's just wasting your time.
Now, we had promised listeners we were going to reveal your cell phone number. I
appreciate that. That's yeah.
Okay.
So let's change lanes for a second. You mentioned diversity and inclusion, and obviously the Me Too movement is a hot topic.
Yep.
One thing I'm very curious about and interested in is a lot of the media coverage is about the power dynamic within an office or a larger corporation. Not as much of it seems to touch on the entrepreneur, the founder, the individual. Do you think that there will be a wave of women that feel more inspired to be the founder and thereby have more control over their destiny?
Oh, I already see it. It's amazing. We in fact, we had this brand. It's been dormant since I started at Entrepreneur called Women Entrepreneur. And I don't know why it originally got folded back into Main Entrepreneur, probably because there might have been a time where people said, you know what, we don't want to segment and we should just be talking to all entrepreneurs, and maybe it got folded back in. But I have to tell you, I am hearing from women all the time who are saying, why are you not doing specific content about the challenges of being a woman entrepreneur? And we do that stuff, but it just gets blended into everything else. And so we are actually relaunching that right now. There were some amazing women who had reached out to me, former journalists, people in really high kind of branding spaces who had asked me to do this. And I said, you know what, let's just bring everybody together. Let's bring all of you together. And I'm stepping away. Like I put our senior editor, Stephanie Schomer, on this. And I was like, Stephanie, go like meet with all of these women and let's come up with a plan for something that really addresses the needs of that market and those women entrepreneurs right now, because there are a ton of them out there. They're very inspired. They are inspired by each other. They're having amazing conversations, and they're running into challenges that are so appalling. Things like that it is harder for women to get a small loan, like a small business loan, and that they're not taken seriously by investors. I hear that all the time when we profile female entrepreneurs, and those things have to change. And one of the ways that they're going to change is by women building a community, so that they're moving in lockstep. They're sharing information and they're sharing tools and tactics. And then two, that more women are getting into those other positions where they're working at the banks and they're working at the venture capital funds and they're working in high levels at the major brands who are going to partner with some of these smaller startups. There's so much energy there. It's really exciting and amazing. And I almost honestly feel like the thing that makes me nervous is that we're late to it, that we're late to launching Women Entrepreneur, and we should have done it 5 years ago.
Yeah, I can sense your passion for it. It's an incredible movement. So, shifting gears again, you have a book coming out with your wife. I
do, yeah.
What does that look like on tour? Who has editorial control? How that might work?
Yeah. So the book is called Mr. Nice Guy. It comes out October 16th. It is let me be very clear. It is unrelated to my job as editor-in-chief of Entrepreneur Magazine. And I give that caveat because it's about something totally different. It's designed to be like a really fun beach read, something of a send up of what it's like to work in New York media. So the premise of the book is that it's about two people who sleep together each week and then critically review each other's performance in a magazine. And then things get extremely extremely acrimonious, and the kind of scheming editor-in-chief gets involved. And it was a lot of fun. It was many years in the making. My wife is a novelist, and so I had this idea that I had hung on to for many years. I had it in my 20s, and I tried to execute it a couple times myself, and I was not able to because I'm just not a fiction writer. I didn't know how to do it. And when she sold her most recent novel, she didn't know what her next project was. And I said, you should write my book because we both love this premise. I'm never going to write it myself. And she said, let's do it together. So we embarked upon this very dangerous journey of two people writing a book together, let alone two people writing a book together that's about two people criticizing each other's sexual performances. And we, and you know what? I got to say, though, it's been, not only was it a really great experience and a really great relationship builder, but I also think that it identified and highlighted to me a lot of valuable insights that all entrepreneurs should have about teamwork. Look, we had very specific roles in this book. We always knew what each other were doing. We always knew what our strengths were. So we were able to defer to each other in particular parts of the book. It came together really nicely. And now we are plotting the marketing for this thing, which has been quite a project. But I got to tell you, being the unfair advantage, entrepreneurs are always talking about the unfair advantage. The unfair advantage of being editor-in-chief of a magazine that everyone wants to talk to is significant because she's marketed a couple novels before, and it's very hard to get attention for a novel. And it is, at least right now, we'll see how it turns out when the book actually comes out. But it's been a lot easier to get people, in the influencer space and throughout media to talk to us because of my role, which I'll take.
So let's go rapid fire. We're going to get you out there in a couple moments, but I'm curious, any Southern roots, Southern family, any ties to the region, or you're completely out, completely New York, other places?
Do you consider South Florida to be the South?
I sure don't.
Neither do I. Do you consider North Florida to be the South?
I do. I'm hesitant to claim it. I don't want to offend any of our friends and fans in that beautiful region.
Jacksonville, yes.
Florida's a lively place that I hesitate a little, but yeah.
Yeah. Well, so so the answer is really no. I grew up in South Florida. My parents are New Yorkers. And what we always say in Florida is that North Florida is the South and South Florida is the North. So I was curious what you guys thought, but they're very different cultures. So my parents are New York Jews who moved down to South Florida like everyone else. And then, of course, all their kids moved back to New York.
Okay. Any travels to the South, or will your appearance at the Dig South conference be some sort of watershed moment?
No, it certainly won't. We've traveled a lot through the South. In fact, my wife's previous novel, the one that she sold, and then we were trying to figure out what to do next, which is called The Heart You Carry Home, was about so she had done. Do you know what Rolling Thunder is?
Yeah.
Yeah. So she had as a 25-year-old, this was a long time ago, as a 25-year-old, she rode with Rolling Thunder, like all the way. She rode on the back of motorcycles of these like Vietnam vet guys. And she went cross country into DC. And so that inspired her to write this novel about a woman whose father is a Vietnam War vet, and then her husband was sent to Iraq, comes home with PTSD. Pretty messed up, and she has to flee him and ends up on a cross-country motorcycle trip with her dad and his war buddies, and they're heading out from I'm trying to remember exactly where they start. I think Tennessee, and then they head cross-country. So we did the drive, we rode, we did the drive. We drove all the way through the South. We did like a cross country not a motorcycle trip because I don't know how to ride a motorcycle, but we did a cross country bike road trip by ourselves. And it was amazing going through it and spending a lot of time down there.
I do love how you asked me if I knew what Rolling Thunder was, and I just said yes, and in no way clarified it for listeners. Just I know what it is. So
yeah. Oh, that's right. I should have stopped and actually done that. Right. It's like, if you know it, then everybody knows it. It's a group of a group of Vietnam veterans and other veterans. Right. But I think it started with Vietnam veterans who ride every Memorial Day. They do a kind of collective motorcycle trip where they all kind of meet up and becomes this gigantic thundering group of veterans who arrive in DC for some kind of rally, right?
And it was a very famous Bob Dylan tour in the 60s too.
Yeah. Last thing. So you've traveled around the South. We got to talk about food. Did you eat anything you liked? Did you get into anything new or different? What's your impression of it?
So I'm a tricky person to talk to food about because I have, fun fact, and this may prompt follow-up questions, which is fine, no sense of taste. Yeah, I know. So my olfactory nerves, which are right up here, were damaged when I was a baby. I have no memory of it. And if you cannot smell, then you cannot taste. And let me break that down for you. So when you put food into your mouth and you experience what you think of as taste, is sort of colloquially how we're thinking of it. Those are actually two separate things. So there's taste and flavor. So taste is actually just what happens on your tongue, sweet, salty, sour, bitter. That's just those categories. That works fine for me. But then flavor is what happens when the odor molecules from your food go to the back of your throat and up, and they're read by your olfactory nerves, which are right here. It happens instantaneously, and that's what creates the sensation of flavor. So that's the difference between chocolate and just sweet. So I get the sweet. I do not get the chocolate. So I have never been a particularly thoughtful eater for that reason.
Okay, I have hundreds of questions.
I know.
Or would not be appropriate. I'm going to ask one and then turn it back to Stan to back this up. Does that? So do you essentially just make food choices by like weight and nutritional content? I mean, it's just like units of food. Do you just want an object that has some fiber in it, or how do you? Is it like that? Like, how do you think about it?
Yeah. Well, so it would be super easy if you could just go into the restaurant and be like, I will have the food, like one block of food, please.
Quarter pound of hot food.
Yeah, just bring the food and I'll have the food. Right. But I've thought about that a lot because I do make choices in what I eat. And those choices are based on a number of different things. So there are textural considerations, for example. I really like food that is experiential in some way. Like, for example, a lot of Asian cuisines involve a lot of like dipping and mashing and like multiple things. And like, that's fun because it's like an experience. I like spicy foods. So I do like a lot of, I do like a lot of Southern foods for that because I can get spice. Spice is not a flavor or a taste. Spice is a feeling inside of a nerve in your face called the fifth cranial nerve. It's called the trigeminal nerve, and that's what creates sensation. So I like spicy foods. And then you know what? We're just habitual eaters. Like that's just how we go, like we will decide we like something and we'll keep eating it just because I think we are used to it. And so I do a lot of that.
Well, when you're down here, we'll drag you out to a pig picking. I don't know if you know what that is.
No.
It's a whole hog. You smoke the whole thing. And then the name's a little bit on the nose because you literally
just like rip it off of the thing.
And it's a party, and it's very visual, and it's a lot of fun. And we'll be sure to entertain you with that.
That sounds good.
Fascinating stuff.
Yeah, and to take us out here today, Jason, maybe you could touch briefly on what our attendees can expect on April 26th, the Dig South Tech Conference. Maybe a little warm up.
Yeah, sure. Well, we did a little bit of it earlier. I feel like when entrepreneurs reach out to me because they're looking for press, they are revealing all of these misunderstandings about how to actually do that. And it is a critical element of business, and one that I feel like I am fortunate to be in a position to swing the doors open to. I think a lot of people don't understand media. They don't understand how reporters and editors make decisions. And I want to illuminate that for them. And honestly, understanding that is also understanding so many other things about business, because the key, and I'll talk more about it obviously when I'm there, but the key to understanding how to get press is to understand how the journalist thinks. I think very, very often the number one problem that people have when they reach out to press and they do it wrong is that they're thinking too much about what they want and they're not thinking about what the reporter wants. And you have to think about what the reporter wants because it's their product. They're the ones that are going to tell you the story. And that is not any different from reaching out to investors. You have to understand what they want. It's not any different from reaching out to customers. You have to understand what they want. The more you understand what your audience wants and you can talk to them in a way that they can see the value, value to them, the more you'll get what you are looking for yourself. So to me, it's all about explaining how journalism works and how journalists think and how to tell your story in a way that makes them want to tell your story.
A deep journey into the mind of the journalist. Well, thank you so much.
It's going to be scary.
Yeah, for joining us today. It's been our pleasure to have you as a guest. I think John might want to say goodbye over here, but we will see you in just 3 months.
Bye. Good to have you.
Bye. Thanks, guys. I really appreciate it and look forward to being there.
Jason Feifer's presentation on Thursday, April 26, 2018 at Dig South Tech Conference in Charleston is brought to you by our partners at Vertical Holdings. Learn more at verticalholdings.net.